So, from pilots to scale, private sector's role in LAC's DPI future. And of course, I'm going to invite our penultimate panel for today to join me on the platform. And of course, our moderator is the Chief of Solutions and Product Officer of EkStep Foundation, Mr. Alok Gupta. And our panelists are test Mr. Marcus Allende Lopez, who is the CEO of Blerify, Mr. Mervyn Eyre, who is the president and the CEO of Fujitsu Caribbean, and lastly, Mr. Wayne Simper, the executive director of EI. Another exceptional panel. Pleased to make them feel welcomed.
Well, thank you for inviting us here and have an opportunity to have a conversation. Before I start, I just want to share a story. My exposure to Caribbean countries was through cricket. So that is how I got introduced to the speed and the energy of this of this land. And it's very interesting. We talk about collaboration. For many years, for me, West Indies was the country. I never realized there were multiple. So cricket gave that first glimpse of collaboration. It's been exciting to be here. This is my first trip to this region. So thanks for that. Now, throughout the day, we have heard how different countries are on the journey of transformation through DPI. As Matthew mentioned, we are seeing a significant momentum across the world in terms of how countries are taking the path towards what we refer as inclusive digital society through DPI. Over 100 countries have already taken at least one DPI, journey, and we have seen few countries who have actually rolled out shared capabilities across the society where citizens are able to see value across multiple sectors. Fundamentally, we are looking at a situation where the value of DPG as an enabler for the inclusive digital society is fairly established, and yet we still feel there are certain bottlenecks, right, which is inhibiting the ability for the countries to adopt DPI, and also realizing the full value of these rollouts in terms of value to the citizens in the socio-economic development at large. Now, before we go into the panel, since we are talking about private sector role, I would just like to give a brief glimpse, of how market or the private sector played a role in India, journey of rolling out the digital transformation, through the DPI. I was fortunate to be part of that journey. Aadhaar was where I worked very deeply, and then has been there as part of this for last 10 to 15 years. So I would love to use that experience to just bring how private sector played a role, and which will probably shares will kind of create some possible and imaginations and going beyond that. If you can put the slides. Okay, we have few chairs in front, but hopefully it will not hide the important aspect. Um, 2008, as Julia was referring, India only had 20% citizens having a bank account. We had a significant issue about social benefits having leakages, the eligible beneficiaries not actually getting the benefits. Keeping that problem in mind, India started with the journey of Aadhaar, where the fundamental objective was to enable two shared capabilities: identity authentication and able to do know your customer digitally. And while this was done, India being 1.5 billion, it was a huge challenge. How do you run at scale? India basically focused on two things: leveraging the market ecosystem, the private sector, to scale. We were at peaks doing 2 to 3 million enrollment per day and processing the equivalent amount of identities. And that's where the private sector played a very, very important role, and also leveraging the existing infrastructure in the government. Instead of rolling out a new infrastructure, a new government officials, how do you leverage your existing setup at center, at state? It was leveraged to the maximum. And that basically triggered the next wave of innovation by the market. The banking sector, both private sector as well as the government banks, along with the telecom private players, largely it was a private player, ecosystem, use this opportunity of reduced KYC with a relevant policy put in place. Uh, we saw banking access to 80% population in 9 years. We saw a dramatic reach in the use of mobile. The penetration of mobile rapidly moved over the period of time. And of course, with the population advantage, the cost of data is extremely, low now, in this last 10 years of work. The fundamental point is Aadhaar enabling a eKYC as a shared capability allowed the private sector in banking and in the telecom to leverage that, reduce the cost of transaction of opening a bank account as well as giving a SIM card. And that made the ability for these market players to go in regions which was traditionally not viable as a business. And that helped India to solve that fundamental problem in which Aadhaar was originated from. We were able to set up additional infrastructure to to basically allow direct payment to the beneficiary account in addition to what Aadhaar has enabled, and that was utilized by different social benefit programs across center and the state. In short, the focus was with the challenge which India was facing. How do we convert that into opportunity and yet leverage the private sector capacity and the innovation, but give that fundamental basic capability as a DPI, as a shared capability, which fundamentally reduces the cost of transaction, which was inhibiting the market to solve the problem, as well as allow the ability to create new market models where the banking was gone beyond just the bank, someone coming to the bank versus a business correspondent, reaching out to the individual where the physical setup was not viable. And with this, fundamentally, what India experienced was there is a new way to solve the societal problems. There's a new way to drive the developmental at the population scale, where the digital public infrastructure combined or enabling the private sector and the public sector innovation, you know, basically makes that happen. And I think Dan made that point, which is very apparent. DPI is not about technology. And if I have to really say, India's success in this was 50% technology. The rest of it was really the enabling policy, enabling the market innovation to come in on top of it to solve multiple problems. And hence, by reducing some of the transactional cost, it also allows the market to innovate not only technologically, but also through different business models. And that triggered the next wave of innovation. India went after multiple additional solutions and multiple newer DPI as a shared capability. It went beyond the identity and the social benefits, and you can see a multiple range of initiative. I'm not going to go into the details, but just to give an example to take it forward, then came the next wave of UPI. Now UPI as a solution is an instant payment, but again what it did as a shared capability allowed any person to pay from any bank account to any bank account. You don't need to be on the same bank, you don't need to use the same app. We saw a significant amount of apps being made because it allowed the market to come. Multiple apps being made by private sector banks, public banks, as well as non-banking technical technology solution companies. And what we witnessed there was you had big players playing. You can see Google there, you can see WhatsApp there, and you had homegrown small startups. The names Paytm and PhonePe are those. And today the beauty of that innovation is one of the small players, PhonePe, today is among the top two, competing head to head with the big tech players. Fundamental point is reduce the friction, enable the level playing field for the market innovation to take. Let the competition allow to come and help solve the citizens' problems, solve for the use cases of the problem. This fundamentally, although it's instant payment, what it really did was penetrate the use of digital payments to small businesses, to a hawker. If you go to India, you will see every hawker will have a QR code. The payment has completely moved from cash to digital. And that was not just about being part of digital. In addition to that, ability for everyone to share their financial data seamlessly digitally so that they can access to services and loans fundamentally shifted the game, because what we witnessed was the moment you got the large population from a small hawker to a big business be part of financial inclusion, be able to have access to bank, have a ability to pay and receive payment digitally, it fundamentally opened the door for allowing the market to again come and provide new fintech solutions where they were able to give micro loans to folks who may not have the traditional assets to get loan, who may not have the income proofs, but their digital payment history, whether it is UPI or otherwise, became an alternative source for the lenders to prove their asset. And again, going back, the fundamental cost of transaction to give that micro loan went dramatically down, which made these fintechs provide this in a viable, profitable business. So, again, in this, the market players, the private sector, the innovators and startups really unlocked the next level of value, where fundamentally what we witnessed was the formalization of economy went very rapidly to the last mile. From a big tech, from a small tech, from a hawker to a big business, everyone was becoming part of a formal economy. And from there, now India is moving towards how do we now from there go to help country, to help every citizen towards growing in terms of their aspiration. And hence the next wave of work which is now happening is how do you provide the similar level playing field in terms of commerce, in terms of jobs, skilling and livelihood, and also with the energy, the electric energy and the new age energy, how do you basically accelerate that industry by enabling interoperable networks, because all of that again is done by multiple private sector players. If you do not have an interoperable way, it basically inhibits everyone to grow, uh, in the new energy space. The point here is, again, how do you enable the minimum capabilities as shared capabilities and yet allow the market to come, the startups to come, to solve very diverse set of problems for the citizens rather than everything done by government. And second part, now what India is focusing is use of AI. How can language AI and the generative AI fundamentally solves two problems? One is the language barrier as well as the literacy barrier. And again, the market is playing a significant role here as well. So, in short, in many ways, DPI, the digital public infrastructure, and the market innovation became for India a new development model, through which now India is looking at how do they really, get the formalization and the socio-economic development at scale in an inclusive manner. And this is one of the recent, report which basically estimates there's $100 billion market value created in startups by DPI, which fundamentally means that you're not only solving the societal problems, but you're also solving it through the private sector, which means you're actually improving the socio-economic, the aspirations of the of the individuals. So, with that, we'll come to our panel. So, today's discussion in panel will explore how private sector will collaborate with governments, with funders, with open source communities, as well as developmental organizations to help countries accelerate their DPI journey, to help countries to realize the potential in making the inclusive digital society. Because fundamentally, if you're looking at today, the penetration of technology is already happening in all aspects. How do we use this technology to work for all? So, with that, if we can introduce ourselves before we go into the question. So, if you can go, Mervyn.
Good afternoon. Happy Tuesday. Pleasure to be here. Thanks, Maurice, for inviting me. I'm a battle weary, scarred industry practitioner who has been through at least 4 generations of IT, of technology in the region, across the region. This forum, thanks for putting it on, is really, really important and happy to contribute to it. Thanks for the audience who have the stamina to have stayed. That's great. It's been a real pleasure listening to the presentations. Dr. Miajan, especially yours, since we're the core of a lot of what you said there, and Anika, the same here, just to see how partnership has worked out in bringing value. Look forward to the conversation. Oh, I'm the head of Fujitsu Caribbean. So.
Hi, can you hear me? Wayne Simper. I'm an executive director at EY Caribbean. I lead the government and public sector practice for most of the English-speaking Caribbean. Resident here for about 8 years, and in that time we've gone from setting up the practice here in Jamaica to now serving government clients in about 14 Caribbean countries. It was a pleasure to be with you today.
Hi everyone, my name is Marcos Allende. I would say I'm a technologist. My background is technical. I'm a physicist, a quantum physicist that started his career working at the Inter-American Development Bank and getting involved with all these digital public infrastructure, working on digital public goods, open source. And then I saw actually precisely the need and the opportunity for complementing that with private sector developments, and then we that's why we founded Blerify, that is a startup based in Latin America that is enabling technology for creating digital identity solutions with governments, for the government and for the private sector, and looking forward to talking a little bit about that.
All right. So we'll start with our panel with the first question. So, and it's open to all three of you. How do you see the digital transformation journey in LAC evolving? And if you can, from your perspective, what are the top 3 priorities you're witnessing countries are focusing, and the use cases? Hey, Marvin, you can start.
I appreciate that. And yeah, in terms of the role Fujitsu has played, we, as a leading systems integrator in the region, over the years have implemented enterprise solutions in both public sector, private sector, whether it be social services, police systems, land titling systems, the whole work. So we've had years of visibility of how governments work, how governments engage. And personally, and Chris, I really want to appreciate you bringing the JITSA work that we did. And just a little context on that, around 10, 12 years ago, the local IT private sector, not the telcos, we excluded the telcos deliberately because we felt that there was a strong group in there, felt the need to get together as a group to try and cause change, with a view of fulfilling many of the intentions of what has been communicated today, primarily around how does one encourage a public sector, private sector conversation. In fact, more importantly, how to derive value from technology. The fact that JITSA was not as sustainable as we would have wanted in itself for the researchers, I think proves evidence that there is still a lot of work to be done. So in answer to the question, and I, just sitting on the balcony, I think everybody agrees that digital transformation is fundamentally important, and at the core is about sustainability. And we see organizations, governments across the region at different stages of it. there's still a lot of focus on automation. And I would say, if I'm to score us across the region, a number of the forward thinkers have reached the high levels of integration across the business. I think there's a long way to go to actually realize the transformative element of what we're trying to achieve here. I think everybody agrees on the why, and today it's very clear that the what, there's getting alignment on it. Where we tend to struggle in the region, and I think we have unique issues here, is on the how. We tend to trivialize and don't take time out for the how. And I've listened in the course of the day. I'm going to ask some questions here, right, around the how. People have used the word we need to work together. How do we work together? That hasn't happened naturally, right? How do we collaborate? How is that achieved? How do we build trust? How do we drive change? How do we derive value? How do we solve societal problems using these technologies? We're still very focused on building infrastructure and building the foundations for them. But I'm sharing the experiences that we have that we tend to struggle with the how. And my view on this is because how is a horizontal word. We're very good at silos and working in silos, but across the region, we're not very good at bridging barriers, at horizontal perspective, at process work, which I know your business does a lot of. At how do you tie stakeholders together? How do you measure value? So I think that that's something that even with all of the great insights we've got together today, as a Caribbean region, we need to solve the how problem. And Anika said earlier, the journey about procurement. We can't wait for the procurement process. Can you believe that? Well, that says it in itself. There needs to be changes around that. If you're going to get private sector, public sector collaboration, there needs to be some fundamental changes of how things work, right? I have strong views on that. And this is why whenever Maurice calls me, I always say, I'm here, right? But to me, that's the pressing issue that we need to solve.
So I would say since COVID-19, every conversation in any ministry, department, and agency, health, education, transport, it doesn't matter. It's all about digital now. The three biggest priorities I commonly see across the region, the first is the tax systems. There's barely an island not putting in a new tax system from Belize to the Eastern Caribbean. Often they are proprietary, but due to the open source movement, we've been able to at least encourage that they share that data and make it interoperable with these other platforms. The other major one is the social protection systems. So we're seeing right now in Jamaica the launch of a social protection platform or a tendering to do so. This follows St. Lucia and Dominica, and indeed in Trinidad, the social benefits wallet being built on top of the national ID system. So the ability to get benefits directly into citizens' bank accounts and enable them to enroll more easily is a real priority. And then the other big one, which probably isn't a surprise, is tourism. So the digital border and immigration systems. So the Caribbean is increasingly fighting after their share of high-value tourism. And that means a prime minister of one of the Eastern Caribbean islands was lamenting to me that when you land in that country, you're greeted by British-style uniformed customs officers, which hasn't changed since the old days. So the vision of the future is that if you have the right passport, if you are from one of the countries that make up where most of the tourism comes from here, you can land and enter the border without seeing a customs officer. That data is pulled directly from the airlines, and you don't have to fill in landing forms anymore. Not move it online like we've done in so many islands, but just eliminate it altogether and really make it frictionless and make tourists want to come back to our countries. So I'd say those are the three priority sectors where we're seeing the most traction around the region, with health being a very close fourth.
So I would like to reflect about how we are seeing now a big change on identity specifically. So if we look at if we reflect about for how long we've had the internet, right? Internet services. So internet has has been around for about 3 decades, 30 years. Bigger adoption started 2 decades ago. And the first use cases that appear on the internet were e-commerce, right? People started to buy and things over the internet. And for that, a payment layer was necessary. So different payment mechanisms online appeared, and that has been around for a long time. Interestingly, even if you thought you would thought that for buying things and for paying for things you would need an identity layer, the internet has not come with an identity layer, and we have not had digital identity as individuals until very recently, or even not until now. And so what we have seen in the past 2, 3 years, also accelerated by COVID, is that governments that are the organizations that are responsible for providing physical and digital identity mechanisms to individuals have realized that this is not anymore, a nice to have. It is a must have to provide digital identity means for individuals to prove who they are online, to access public sector services, and also to interact with the private sector in a more reliable way, limiting data exposure and limiting fraud, which is very high today in these areas of e-commerce and payments. So what we are seeing in Latin America now is that Latin America and the Caribbean are the most interesting regions in the world for seeing the new solutions for digital identity happening in governments. Why? Because if you look at Europe, what Europe has is a very strong regulation, actually over-regulating many of the things that you can do there. And also in Europe, many things already work, or most of things already work pretty well. So the incentives for doing something that is transformative, for example, in the field of digital identity, is not very high. If you go to the US is very fragmented in terms of the digital government. You have the different states that are doing different things. There's not actually too much motivation on the private sector to do things for incentives. But in Latin America, there's a big gap in many countries from what we have to what we would like to have. And there's a lot of incentives now because you don't have a limiting regulation and you have very well trained people, specialists, professionals that are looking to bring technology and that are looking to bring innovation into the digital identity solution. So what we are seeing is that within this decade, Latin America and the Caribbean is going to take a leading role in the implementation of the digital identity solutions with some architectures that we saw today based on open standards and protocols that are going to set a reference for the rest of the world on how you can create regional interoperability to also achieve international interoperability. And through identity, everything will come. Because when you think about digital health, digital education, when you think about international payments, for example, here in the Caribbean, that has been for many years a conversation to how to make easier payments across islands. Digital identity is at the core of that. If individuals can have the control of their digital identity in a means like a digital wallet, they will be able to integrate everything else and have a digital self that is private, secure, and interoperable. So that is what we are seeing that is happening right now in the region.
Okay. So I'm going to be a little provocative here now. So Wayne, you heard, right, DPG's open source, and also from a country perspective, right? Sovereignty is important. Countries are definitely considering open source. Now, as a system integrator, right? What's your observation in terms of countries specifically asking for open source? Why or why not? And are you looking to implement solutions using open source only if country wants, or are there other reasons as a system integrator?
Yeah, I mean, we love the open source ecosystem. So we're partners of MOSIP, OpenCRVS, and we're actively implementing some of those solutions right now. But I think one of the things our clients value from us is that we're technology agnostic. So if I give you an example without naming names, we're currently implementing an ID solution with a Caribbean government. And initially we looked at MOSIP as the obvious candidate, probably best in class as a open identity system. But the client requirements were that it was built mobile first, so it could take advantage of recent developments in AI for particularly facial recognition. And so that's led us down a different path of actually reusing bits of different DPGs to build something custom. So for us, it's not really about whether it's hybrid, proprietary. Very often, for example, when we're doing digital border solutions, we partner with a proprietary vendor who does all the hardware. For us, it's really about what's the client need and what's the best set of technologies that get them there.
So, the other question, of course, EY being a big, organization globally, given if you use open source, typically you will not get a commercial back-to-back service from them, right? Unless they have additional, service. Now, you being a big organization, you probably can create an internal capacity to basically support the code you use as open source and meet the country's need because you're in a commercial contract there. But if I reflected on a local SI ecosystem where they may not be as big as you, how do you see this? Do you see any challenges for them, to really use open source and yet being able to give a commercial support to the countries as you guys are able to?
Yeah, I mean, so we are in 150 countries, 400,000 people. So we're fairly large. And while I'd love to say that the local ecosystem is easy in the Caribbean, it's actually it's not. It's a huge challenge. So when we talk to some of the local partners and we ask them about the DPGs, the digital public infrastructure, for them it's asking them to invest in a specific technology of 250 technologies for a single client, a single solution. We can do it because we've got several DPGs being implemented in several countries all the time, and then we can use that talent to support us in this region. A local partner can't do that, so they would prefer to invest in sort of a broader ecosystem like the Microsoft stack and work cross competency. The way that it currently works and the way I think there is some traction is governments have a role here in when they're procuring firms like us as being a lead partner, a lead system integrator to bring in localization. You can do that through the way you score tenders, for example, and having local partners involved. We don't want to be in the business of supporting these systems long term. We're consultants. We want to advise, implement, and exit. The local partners can learn those systems through our implementation as our partner and then stay on for the long-term support contracts with government. But it really needs that central nodal agency to try and promote that kind of thing across government. So, I think I give a lot of credit to Ministry of Digital Transformation in Trinidad. They're doing all the right sorts of things around engaging with the local ecosystem and getting local partners involved in the long-term delivery of these contracts.
Mervyn, do you have any?
Yeah, I mean, again, I support that last comment. I think MDT in Trinidad and IGov are doing great work in that regard. I think it's a very valid point, again, having been scarred by years of trying to get things working and getting value here. This is one of the areas we need to have more joined up conversations. This is an opportunity where scale comes in. At the end of the day, I would say the outcome has to be a sustainable outcome, right? And that means it most likely will result in a hybrid case of open source and product-based, depending on application use cases and willingness to invest in skills and capability for sustainability, right? Because open source, which our business, myself personally, very passionate about, is complex as well. In other words, it requires its own commercial model, and there is a degree of lock-in for that too. There's no such thing as having no lock-in. So I think there's a great opportunity on the back of the DPI conversation for the people in this room, because at the end of the day, and this kind of goes to the how, there's not very many of us that need to sit around a table to have the tough, robust conversations around change, around how do we influence how things are procured and the things that are in our way at the moment. So I would say that it's a case by case, but governed by some serious digital leadership from both public sector and private sector.
Yeah.
Yes, I would like to double down on that idea, the idea about sustainability. For example, when after years of working with governments and selecting the best solutions, the best projects for long-term sustainable implementations with governments. You realize that private sector companies that come with licenses that are, for products that are very narrow, that don't follow any open standard, don't follow any open protocol, and that charge the governments millions of dollars a year, are not sustainable at all. But also, we need to look on the other side, because sometimes now people look at solutions that, okay, so I found this library on the internet and it's, this open source platform, and now we are going to use that open source platform because we don't need to pay for a vendor for that. And we implement that solution. But then who is going to provide continuity into the solution? If there are security breaches, who is going to look into them? Are we going to trust just an open source, community in order to implement that solution? Who is going to provide capability to the people that are implementing that in the government? So what we have realized is that in order to look for sustainability, actually, there's a combination of things that give you the right formula. First, you need to use open source standards and protocols for sure, because with open source standards and protocols, you will never have interoperability and you will never be connected to the other things that are being developed around the world. You also need to leverage as much digital public infrastructure and goods as you can, because those are resources that are available that are super useful. But then when you come to how do we develop like the customized implementations that we need, because everyone needs some level of customization, everyone needs some level of integration. So for that is where the private sector comes with the help that allows governments to develop the right solution for them. And then what is the sustainability model there? What needs to change there is, instead of just charging for licenses that are locked in, the solution is to develop joint venture models where the public sector, with the help of the private sector, can develop solutions that not only are getting a lot of money drained from the government, but can also generate value. For example, in the case of India. So the DPI of India has generated so much value in solutions that are on top of it, that are developed by entrepreneurs and private sector, that the government can get money from that value that is being generated. So the alliance between the public sector and the private sector to develop joint solutions that generate value and money can serve to finance both the public and the private sector, and also provide resources to everything that happens below the DPI, the DPG, and the open standards and protocols.
Yeah. So if I keep the solutions built on top of DPI just for the site, right? I mean, India, Brazil, and many countries, I mean, in fact, most of the countries, right? Either they're having internal teams or using a SI model, right? Now, um, even India, for example, right, for the sovereignty reasons, they actually got the code created by, SIs, right? They own the code, or. So the question is, the sovereignty is a very important and a very critical aspect for the DPI part. A solution on top of it is a different conversation. When we combine this need, which is a very genuine need, right, with the variation of the population scale, with the variation of budget constraints, with the variation of the tech capacity in different countries, the SI model, which is fundamentally reuse of the code construct, right, at best, because you're going to use open source if you're not writing from scratch, may not work for smaller capacity, more budget constrained, lesser population scale. Now, in the industry, we have seen product based, reuse rather than code reuse. It's a product reuse, right? And we have seen in the industry product use which is based on open source. We have Moodle, Joomla, many more, Drupal, right? Any reflection from how can the product based approach be introduced? I mean, you are one of those tech companies, and yet address the sovereignty concern, because we need to meet the need in a sovereign perspective, but also make it viable. Any reflections how to do that?
Yeah, so in our case, what we've learned is that when you develop product-based solutions, the first thing that you need to do is work on top of open standards and protocols. The second need is modularity. You need to develop the solution in a way that is modular, so you don't become a vendor that locks clients, because no client is looking for that right now. So you need to allow the clients to be able to say which modules they want. And the third thing is that you allow the clients, especially government clients, to be data sovereign. You provide modules so they can customize their final solution, but they use their own infrastructure, they use their own databases, and they basically keep data for themselves because that's the most precious thing. So basically, you give them a set of libraries and API that you maintain that are perfect for them, but they can decide to stay with you because you are generating value for them through the product that you are enabling in a custom way for them. That's the way.
Well, reflections. So my smallest client population is probably 15,000 in a country, and Jamaica would probably be the largest. So there's a huge range within small countries about capacity. It is possible in Jamaica and Trinidad to have a local digital ecosystem. We're managing the national digital transformation for Grenada. It is possible in Grenada, but they're sorely needing regional collaboration, bigger markets to serve. I was reflecting a little bit on my study tour to India, and you go to the National Cybersecurity Center, and they tell you, yeah, we don't really have the resources at a state level. We can't find the skills at a state level to run this cybersecurity center, so we do it at a India level. So some of the states of 100 million people can't put together the right skills to run these cybersecurity operations, and we expect countries like Grenada and St. Vincent to do it each individually. So I think there's a need to find some areas like that to join up across the Caribbean, explore shared service models, and that would then allow a bigger market for small vendors in small countries to sell into as well.
And Alok, I think the zero went up about 5 minutes ago, right? So I think the issue of repeatability is a shared problem between public and private sector. And I can say that having run the business for many years, when it comes to generating value from use of technology, which is a people-based business, we need to collaborate to find ways to have value done in a repeatable way, right? Because the access to skills and capabilities that are generic within the region is at a different scale. There are answers for it, and I'm proposing, because the actual theme around this is really around private sector's role, is that we looking at my experiences, it's painful to see how many things we do repeat just by nature of organizations working on their own, even within government agencies, right? I think we should have an intervention on that. And I believe, I'm not sure who the owner of it is. I'll go back to the JITSA days, right? I think it's the ICT authority now, right? So I'm looking forward to those conversations for some radical, brave digital leadership that changes the way we do things, so that in 5 years' time, we're sitting around this table. We're not talking about the infrastructure we've put in place, the great work we're doing now. Our stories about what transformative things have we done, and what pressing societal problems have we solved by using technology. But repeatability is at the core of it all.
Okay, we're out of time. Can I just ask one quick? Okay, sorry. So I think I just wanted to prompt them. What is that one thing they want to be activated in a word? But never mind. But I think the point, I just want to close it from the perspective. Probably we didn't get the answers today, but I think the purpose of this conversation was to evoke questions, evoke tough questions, because I think ultimately, unless what I would say is, unless the demand, which is countries and the problems countries are striving to solve, sit with the supply. And I think market is a very important aspect of that supply, apart from funders and other organizations, and really collaborate to see how do countries and regions work together to solve it. There are fundamental requirements of sovereignty. They cannot be, violated. Those are very critical aspects. But I believe there are ways, there are methods, there are models in the private sector, in the tech industry. We need to see what are the relevant ones which will help countries to reach their objectives with the participation and collaboration with the market. So thanks everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our panel and our moderator.